Today, I want us to discuss our political journey so far as Yoruba people, because it is important to know where we are coming from if you want to have any idea where we are headed. Knowing our history as Yoruba people is a must so that we can learn from the wisdom and mistakes of our predecessors, because those who do not heed history are doomed to repeat it. Nítorí ẹ̀ ni Yorùbá fi sọ wípé ẹṣin wájú òun ni tẹ̀yìn wò sáré. Àwọn ẹṣin wájú tiwa nínú ìtàn láti lè kọ́ nípa wọn. Ìtàn ọ̀hún sì rèé, ìtàn pàtàkì ńlá gbáà ni lórílẹ̀-èdè wa yìí tá à ń pè ní Nàìjíríà. Nigeria, as we know it today, has been greatly influenced by the politics of Yoruba land, then known as the Western region. And here is the history of that very important era. In those days, the dominant political party in the Western region was Awolowo's Action Group. And by the year 1965, just 5 years after independence, a serious conflict has blown out in the Western region. This is exactly what happened. Way before independence, Awolowo founded Egbe Omo Oduduwa, which later became a full political party. In the year 1959, the British conducted an election, a general election in Nigeria, towards our independence. It was the first election in Nigeria which was going to produce fully indigenous Nigerian leaders. Awolowo contested in that election under Action Group for the post of the Prime Minister of Nigeria. He contested against Tafawa Balewa from the north and Nnamdi Azikiwe from the east. Our political parties then were unapologetically tribal. In the Western region, we had Action Group, which boldly called themselves Egbe Omo Oduduwa. The North had NPC, the Northern People's Congress, and their motto was One North, One People. The East had the National Council of Nigerians and the Cameroons, and although it wasn't founded by an Igbo man, it became fully dominated by Igbo people. So Awolowo contested in that election but lost. Not lost per se actually, because it has been proven that that election was actually rigged by the British in favor of the North, but that is a story for another day. After losing the election, Awolowo made a move that changed everything. He was the premier of the Western region and Akintola was his deputy. Awolowo left the Western region and then went to Lagos, the capital of the Federation, to head the opposition there. He became the opposition leader, and then Nnamdi Azikiwe formed a coalition government with Tafawa Balewa at the federal level. So who was in charge of the Western region in Awolowo's absence? The Ogbomoso man with uncountable tribal marks, Samuel Ladoke Akintola. Níbi tí wàhálà ti wá bẹ̀rẹ̀ gan-an nìyẹn. Awolowo and Akintola began to have ideological conflicts. But before even the ideological conflict, what vexed Akintola the most was that tá a bá fún eégún lágbo, ṣebí a máa ń jọ̀wọ́ okùn ni. Àbí tá a bá jẹ̀kọ, àṣà dáríjì ewé. Awolowo has put Akintola in charge of Yoruba land of the Western region. Yet, he wants to keep controlling the Western region from Lagos. He wants to keep telling Akintola what to do, how to do, and when and why. And Akintola would have none of that. Akintola wanted autonomy, and he needed that autonomy if he must really have his way, because he doesn't really believe in the ideologies of Awolowo anymore. Awolowo's ideologies were progressive and socialist. Akintola would have none of that. Akintola was more of a conservative politician. His ideologies were more in line with that of Tafawa Balewa at the federal level. Now, if you ask me, I think the conflict that generated between Awolowo and Akintola was only to be expected. Let us compare that to what Ahmadu Bello did instead. Ahmadu Bello at this time was also the premier of the northern region, and instead of him leaving that position of the Sardauna of Sokoto and premier of the north, he actually didn't do that. He put his own disciple, a pupil of his, Tafawa Balewa, in Lagos as the prime minister, and he retained his position as the premier of the north. The man held his base and controlled the federal government from his base in the north, and that was the main reason why he was a major target during the 1966 coup, which is another story for another day. But Awolowo left his own base and went to the capital and then tried to control his base from the capital. That was a huge mistake. Yes, I'm sure he banked on the loyalty of Akintola, and truth be told, Akintola was really a loyal mentee. But the man had a taste of power and it didn't remain the same anymore. Now the gap between the ideologies of Akintola and Awolowo was getting wider and wider and wider. It was beginning to create serious problems. By the year 1962, the Western region was already divided between Awolowo's supporters and Akintola's supporters. Something major happened in the legislative house of the Western region at this point. Within the AG, a group of Awolowo supporters tried to impeach Akintola as the premier of the Western region, and this led to what is best called brouhaha and hula baloo. Lawmakers started throwing chairs at themselves. The maize became an instrument of war. Lawmakers were fighting like thugs. The whole of the Western region was given a nickname. It was now known as the Wild West. The federal government had to respond. They responded by declaring a state of emergency in the Western region. But this was a very ugly political move. Tafawa Balewa suspended Akintola as the premier of the Western region. And who did he put in charge? The man, Dr. Moses Adekoyejo Majekodumi. This man was Tafawa Balewa's own personal physician. So it is safe to conclude that for that period, he had his own man in charge of the whole of the Western region. Tafawa Balewa was actually ruling the federal government and the Western region at the same time. Another thing worthy of note is that at this period, Akintola was already an ally of Tafawa Balewa. They were now political allies, working hand in hand. Suddenly, from nowhere, Awolowo was arrested and he was accused of treasonable felony. He was actually accused of plotting a coup. The brief detail was that he had procured arms and he was training some men as far as Ghana, preparing them for a coup against the federal government. So Awolowo was found guilty and he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Many Awolowo Awoists, indeed many Yorubas who were now being identified as Awoists, were very angered by the imprisoning of Awolowo. They felt that there was no iota of truth to that accusation and that Akintola and Tafawa Balewa just wanted an excuse to take Awolowo out of the way. Critics, both locally and internationally, felt like the trial was highly contentious and politically motivated. They believe the whole thing lacked substantial proof. Although the writer Mark Seolun, in his book Oil, Politics and Violence, published a supposed confession by Samuel Ikoku, Awolowo's own secretary, confirming that Awolowo actually was plotting a coup. Many other critics, such as Wole Soyinka, dismissed it all as a ruse. Now, after they had taken Awolowo out of the way, the man was now in jail. Akintola was brought back as the premier of the Western region. And what did he do next? In 1963, he officially broke away from the action group and then formed his own party. He called it NNDP, Nigerian National Democratic Party, and that became the ruling party of the Western region. Of course, with full backings of the federal government. NNDP was very unpopular in the Western region. The party was not loved at all. Akintola was hated, greatly hated by much of the Yoruba people. Awolowo was greatly loved by the people, and the love Akintola enjoyed, the love he previously enjoyed, was because he was seen as a loyalist of Awolowo. Now that he was an open enemy of the man that brought him to power, they hated him so much, and they were just waiting patiently for the next general election to remove him out of power. People like Wole Soyinka were already very vociferous in their criticism of his unpopular government. Hubert Ogunde, also a very prominent theatre practitioner, was already throwing shades at Akintola through his own plays. In fact, Akintola responded by banning Hubert Ogunde in the whole of the Western region. The same thing for Wole Soyinka and his group of intellectuals who were against the NNDP. Akintola actually harassed lecturers. He chased them from their quarters, sacked as many as possible, and just was very oppressive generally. So they were all just waiting for that election to come and they would remove him. But before then, something has started. A very violent revolution, and it was called Wetie. You know what that means? It literally means douse it, pour petrol on it, and then set it ablaze. Wetie. But it had not yet become a monster revolution at this period until after what happened in the election. Akintola knew that he wasn't loved by the people. He knew that he was not going to win that election fairly, and he told them in advance with his deputy, the man Remi Fani Kayode, also known as Fani Power. He told the Yorubas that we will win even if you don't vote for us. That made his intention very clear, and that was exactly what happened. Akintola was not voted for, yet he won. The election was marred with a lot of broad-day rigging, thuggery, murder, arson, all forms of violence, just name it. They literally robbed the people of their mandates. Literally, even in places where opposing candidates managed to appear for the election, NNDP politicians were said to have been elected unopposed. And so the people said, ẹ wọlé unopposed àbí? Ó dáa, ẹ padà wọ̀nà pósí. In this period, Akintola was now nicknamed the high priest of election rigging. It was during this time that Wole Soyinka did one thing that got him very popular. He was just a young man in his early 30s at that time, and on the day that the election results were to be announced, Wole Soyinka actually armed himself with a gun and went to the broadcasting station in Ibadan. He seized the tape from the person that was going to play it and replaced it with his own pre-recorded tape. When they played the tape, the whole of the western region were expecting to hear the election results. And what did they hear? The voice of a man calling Akintola an Ole, a thief. Wole Soyinka was arrested, of course, and he was charged for, guess what? Armed robbery. Soyinka in court claimed that there was no robbery, it was just a replacement. Armed replacement. Since he didn't steal the tape, he only replaced it with his own. So the case of armed robbery was not existent at all, and therefore he won the case. But back to our main story. After that election, then Wetie started fully. NNDP politicians were being hunted and killed. Houses were being burnt. Cars, properties, shops, anything. The whole of the western region was literally ablaze, on fire. The federal government, which was quick to declaring a state of emergency in the west when they only had a problem in the house, at this period did not see any reason to declare a state of emergency. When Tafawa Balewa was asked by pressmen in Lagos that why are you not declaring a state of emergency in the western region? The western region is literally on fire. What did Tafawa Balewa say? He said, we are currently in Lagos now, in the western region, and I cannot see any fire around. With Wetie, the Yoruba people had made a very clear statement. They didn't want Akintola's government. And that conflict actually never died down. It kept escalating and escalating until the unthinkable or the unexpected or the expected by any critical observer happened. A group of young radical Nigerians emerged and arrested the situation. On one fateful midnight on the 15th day of January 1966, just the following year, Akintola was killed, Tafawa Balewa was killed, Ahmadu Bello was killed, Festus Okoti Ebo, and so many other prominent Nigerian leaders. They were killed in the first coup that happened in Nigeria, led by the man Nzeogwu Kaduna, who claimed that Wetie, which happened in the western region, was one of the major motivations for the happening of the coup. One naturally would think that that coup would be a solution to the political unrest in Nigeria, but alas, that was only the beginning of our problem, a problem that has yet to be solved even till this day. Catch me in the next episode where I shall be delving into the details of that aspect of our very complex history as Nigerians. As usual, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video very aggressively so that others may watch also and learn from our history. Till I see you again, I leave you with the assurances of the fact that indeed, Washiri.